Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming for the Mountain View Freedom Rally. We appreciate everyone who is here. My name is Doug Manti, and I will be the MC for this event. There's a few housekeeping items that I have to go over before we start. Firstly, this is not a social gathering, but a freedom rally. If you look around, you don't see barbecues lit up and you don't see buckets of chicken. This is not a social gathering, and we have the right to have rallies of this sort. It's been given to us by the Attorney General, and it is our right. We are here in support of small business. We are here because we believe all small businesses are essential. The government and no one has the right to determine what is essential and what not is essential. All businesses are essential. They're essential to a person, a couple, a family. They're essential to a community. We have to have these things. Communities and families thrive with small business. And the government has no right to determine your business is not important. Secondly, we are following the AHS guidelines. Masks are available, hand sanitizer is available, but we also are honoring all exemptions. The same order that says you have to wear a mask also says you have the right to have an exemption to that mask, and we are honoring them at this rally. Thirdly, you'll see over at the table there, we have some brochures and pamphlets. Please feel free to stop by and pick them up. There's some very good information there. I'd also like to just say as a side note that there's other information being handed out at this rally. If it's not from our table, then it has not been endorsed by Mountain View Freedom. So we just have to say that, okay? And fourthly, we are collecting donations and food for the food bank. So it's set up over there. Feel free to support that very good organization. And at this time, I'm going to ask Deborah Forehead to come and lead us in O Canada.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody, the dogs too. I just wanted to say something before I sang O Canada. At the Olds rally, I heard somebody say that we shouldn't be singing O Canada. And you know, I had actually thought that previously. And then I thought about that statement and thought about the words of that song. We don't sing O Canada because it is lifting up the people who are trying to turn us into serfs. We don't sing O Canada because we're happy about what the 1% is doing to those of us who are the backbone of this country. We sing O Canada for the country, not those people. The true north, strong and free. It's about the land that supports us. It's about everything that this country gives us, not the people that would take it away from us. So when you sing O Canada, keep in mind the true north, strong and free. And remember, we own the land, not them. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all our sons' command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you very much. So why are we all here? As I said, we believe all businesses are essential. We are against the designation of essential and non-essential. Like I said, they're essential to someone. Every one of them is needed. This is a wonderful community, but every business in this community is essential to this community, and it will thrive as all these businesses are open. We're going to hear today that the lockdowns and restrictions in place right now are simply not justifiable by the most current data. We're going to hear that, and it's true. I looked this morning, latest numbers, 99.99% of Albertans do not have COVID. 99.992% of Albertans are not hospitalized with COVID. 99.999% of Albertans are not in ICU with COVID. Do these numbers reflect the health crisis? Do these numbers rationalize the fear that people are living in and are promoted by the media? Do these numbers justify the lockdowns and the closures of business? Do these numbers justify the loss of our freedoms and rights? I say no. But there is a crisis in this province. It's a mental health crisis. It's a suicide crisis. It's a drug and alcohol abuse crisis. It's a family and spousal abuse crisis. It's a financial crisis. And not one of those crises were caused by COVID. Every one of them were caused by the COVID lockdowns. There's a difference. At this time, I'm going to ask Shondell Sabat to come up and speak. I'll just read a little bit about him first. Shondell is currently CFO for an international mining investment company and has previously worked at TD Energy, like me, Sampra Energy, Myrant, America's Energy Trading, Canada Energy, and Shell Canada. He likes to believe that he asks questions and seeks answers and offers that others may not, and is always looking for continuous improvement in himself and society. He believes we must continually ask, are we doing this right? And could we do this better? Shondell has a Bachelor of Commerce degree in Finance Honors and he is a chartered financial analyst, a charter holder and past president of the Calgary CFA Society. He has served as a board member for public, private, and many volunteer boards. I'd like to welcome him up at this time.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming out today and hearing our speakers and showing support for your friends and neighbors. As was mentioned in my introduction, I do think of myself as an objective thinker. I remember being back in high school, and when we had debates, I would purposefully take the other side. I would, look at the side that I didn't think represented who I was, and maybe that I didn't really believe. And I would argue that point. And the purpose of that, I thought, was just try to have a willingness to see both sides of an issue, give respect to both sides, and then use that as an opportunity to share ideas so that we could all make better informed decisions. And it's with that lens that I'm here today. I'm here simply to ask a few critical questions and hope that everyone will use this as a foundation to ask their own questions. Questions for themselves, of others, and especially of our decision makers. Firstly, I do want to mention that all death is tragic, and it does bring sorrow sorrow and heartache to those who are left behind. So I in no way want to minimize those who have been affected by COVID, but I think, we all need to ask, was this all really worth it? I know of more people who have committed suicide or died a death of despair during this time than I do anyone who passed away from COVID. I believe these deaths would not have occurred if the lockdowns had not taken place to the severity that they have. There's a lot of evidence that suggests as unemployment rises, deaths of despair increase. We have seen this all across the world and continue to see it today. Early on in this COVID story, and even still today, we're told that we're in this together. My belief is that can't be further from the truth. We're in the same storm for sure, but we're not all on the same ship. Some of us are on a 5-star luxury liner, and some of us are drowning at sea. And I'm seeing more and more drowning at sea every day. We all stand here today in support of our fellow Albertans who are genuinely concerned about the livelihoods of friends and neighbors. There are many data points that highlight the devastation following our province. Something caught my eye in March, and it relates to where's the money going? The Fraser Institute, who I have a lot of respect for, has reported that since COVID began, job losses in the province have been concentrated in the private sector. Private sector employment has fallen by 6.4% from January 2020 to from February 2020 to January 2021. Compare this to the employment gains of 2.9% in the government sector. So, put differently, almost 100,000 jobs were lost in Alberta's private sector, while the government sector actually grew by more than 12,000 jobs. In addition, of the Alberta government's total spending of a little over $54 billion, 50% of it is spent on wages and benefits for government employees. I think these two facts alone could help us to understand the reasons for the difference of opinion on lockdowns. The question I would ask is, do our decision makers really feel the pain of what is going on? In the past year, have any of them really had to suffer the same as local business owners and regular citizens of this province? Have they lost wages? Have they faced bankruptcy? Or have they been part of a family that could not afford to feed themselves? I know they say they feel for Albertans, but do they really? People are much more empathetic, compassionate, and motivated if they have experienced something in the past or are currently experiencing it. All of the decisions that have been made about lockdowns are being made by government officials. No wonder getting traction is difficult. I'm not making any accusations, nor am I making any criticisms. I'm just asking a question. If all of the decisions are being made by those that are not suffering economically any adverse consequences, would different decisions be made if the composition of the decision makers was different?
Yeah.
I won't go into too many statistics here. They're all readily available and widely reported. But here is what we know for a fact about COVID, and we have known this for a long time. Number one, Alberta has had approximately 1,900 deaths attributed to COVID. That's still fewer than the number that die yearly from dementia or heart disease. Number two, the average age of an Albertan that dies from COVID is 81. This is the same as the average life expectancy of an Albertan. Number three, nobody under the age of 20 has died from COVID in Alberta. Compare this to 2019, when 400 Albertans under the age of 20 passed away. Number four, the Globe and Mail has reported that 80% of Canadian COVID deaths occurred in long-term care facilities. That means that here in Alberta, fewer than 400 Albertans outside of long-term care facilities have died. That's less than 0.01% of Alberta's population. As a comparison, in 2019, 14,000 Albertans under the age of 80 passed away. And number 5, our deficit will rise an additional $7.4 billion from previous estimates. That means an extra $1,700 per person in Alberta, or $7,000 for a family of 4. That's just to cover the additional deficit that was recently announced. That's on top of the $16.8 billion deficit that was previously announced. So Alberta is going to be running a total deficit of $24 billion. And number 6, the CDC's own data shows that the survival rate for COVID is 99.99% for people under the age of 50 and 99.5% for those aged 50 to 70. So what does all this tell us? It tells us very clearly that number 1, COVID affects those in long-term care facilities, and that a targeted approach would have saved lives. We knew where the problem was, and we know where it still is, yet we continue to not focus the resources where they're needed the most. 80% of the problem is in one spot. Number 2, COVID has little impact on people who are young and people who are healthy. Number 3, locking down the economy will prove to have done more harm than good, as deaths of despair continue to increase. As deaths of despair continue to increase due to unemployment and loneliness, which are a direct result of lockdowns. And number 4, although monthly COVID deaths are higher than in recent flu seasons, they're still lower than the flu seasons of 2008, 2005, and 1999. My points are the same as pretty much everybody in this crowd, and I'm sure we'll hear more. But the evidence is clear. So why are so many still so scared? I'm going to highlight a few answers. These aren't the right answers, but I think they would provide a good foundation for healthy debate. Number 1, the World Health Organization has been a leader in the fight against COVID, and most countries have been very reluctant to embrace any policies that are contrary to their thinking. In fact, in May of last year, YouTube said that it would not allow content that spreads medical misinformation, including claims about vaccinations that contradict expert consensus from local health authorities or the World Health Organization. Yet, as an example, I look at a country like Taiwan. Taiwan has had one of the best records in fighting COVID, yet they're not a member of the World Health Organization. Canada has had 591 deaths per million people, and Taiwan has had 0.4. Could we not have learned something from these people? Number 2, and this one is particularly important. I study behavioral finance, and a lot of that relates as to how or why people make decisions. So I want to highlight, how are our decision makers going to be? We know that the government payrolls have increased, and we know that government workers continue to receive full, uninterrupted pay, while the private sector continues to get decimated. There's no shared suffering, and until there is, there's unlikely to be much of a shift in the very conservative approach to locking down the economy. Let's ask our decision makers to cut their pay in half until the private sector... Thank you. Let's ask our decision makers to cut their pay in half until the private sector employment is back to where it was prior to COVID. I wonder if this would spur creative thinking and a sense of shared hardship. Number 3, Albertans were told in December that additional lockdown measures were needed and required to prevent a run on the healthcare system, specifically the number of ICU beds. My understanding that there are 272 ICU beds in Alberta, The facts are that we have never come close to utilizing or occupying all of the beds, and we currently sit at a 16% utilization rate. The risk has been drastically reduced, as the decision makers like to say, through the hard work of Albertans. As of March 18, we have been under 300 hospitalizations and have been there for over 3 weeks. This was the target that the government had set in order for us to move into step 3 of reopening. We are well within the guidelines set to move into step 3. This should just be done. No debate, no discussion. It just needs to be done. What needs to be emphasized here is that the hardship that the lockdowns have created will forever shape us for generations to come. Not only that, but the financial and emotional toll has been and will be something that will be felt for generations. Let's remember, we did not finish paying for World War II until the 1970s. We must all ask ourselves, and our leaders, without judgment, criticism, or divisiveness, to do and be better, and to learn from the past, not to pat ourselves on the back. We're going to see this again. And we in this audience know that when that happens, we cannot and must not answer the call the way we have in the past year. There is another way. Let's do what we can to get that message to the leaders and help them understand. Thank you all very much.
Wow, that was very, very good. Some wonderful insights there. We better take heed to what he said, because what he said was right. At this time, we're going to ask Matthew Manti to come up and speak. He's the owner of Training for Warriors in Didsbury, Alberta, and he's going to give a personal perspective of what this lockdown has meant to him.
Hey guys, can everyone hear me okay here? Right distance? Yeah? Okay. Thank you guys so much for having me today. It's such an honor to be up here and to have this opportunity to share a bit of my story and what we're going through today with some... Is it squeaking? Still good? Yeah? We're good. And some of the challenges that we're going through today. So yes, I'm the owner of TFW Didsbury, a fitness facility, obviously in Didsbury. We've been open for about 4 years, and I've been living in Mountain View County since I was 4 years old. One of the best places in the world to live, as far as I am concerned. So, at TFW, we believe in the motivational power of stories, and lessons that can be learned in different ways from stories. I'm going to share one with you today that came to me long ago about things that are happening in our world today that I think is very applicable to what we're experiencing. And there's been, a couple of mentions already of World War II. World War II. And I have to take you back there. I have to take you back there to World War II again, with a story of how the Allied planes were kind of losing the battle of the skies, especially on our bombing missions over Germany. Our planes were inferior, they were getting shot down at a very high rate, and we were losing this battle. And, making it, is it even worth it to do these bombing missions? We're losing so many good men and airplanes in the process. And so this very smart group of individuals gets together and they say, we got to solve this problem. We got to do something about this, or we're going to lose this thing. And what they do is they end up analyzing every single plane that comes back from a bombing mission very, very in depth. They make a chart of every bullet hole, every damage, anything they can find to try and amass some information to maybe be able to improve their planes and the chances of these young men making it back from these missions. And after hundreds and hundreds of planes, you can still search this story and you can see the grid itself that they had. They looked at the data And the main bullet holes and damages were mostly to the wings and the bodies of the airplanes, right? The wings and the bodies. And so they sat around the table a bit, and they're like, well, we got a plan here, look at where all the damages are. I guess we have to reinforce the armor of the wings and the bodies of our airplanes. Right? And they were just about to go through with this until one brave soul, who was a Jewish mathematician, his name was Abraham Wald, he reviewed the data. He reviewed this data, and something hit him like a strike of lightning that was missing from their grand plan. And he goes and he speaks up just in the nick of time, saying, boys, you are missing something massive in what you are about to do here. He said, you're only analyzing data from the planes that have actually made it back. What about all those airplanes that are missing from the data because those young men are now dead? Those planes are gone. Those lives are lost forever. What does that data show? You know? And this group actually listened, you know, and they went back to the drawing board, and they found that all that data actually wasn't for nothing. You know, it wasn't for nothing, because they could look at that data and see that it showed very, very little damages to the engines and the cockpits of these planes. And they said, maybe this isn't because they're not incurring any damages there, but the airplanes that do incur damages to that part of the airplane don't make it back at all, right? Those were the planes that were going down, which there's no evidence. I guess we're just not getting hit in the cockpits and in the engines, they thought, right? Those are the airplanes that are going down. So it was a complete misinterpretation of the data, and what they ended up doing was the complete opposite of the original plan. The complete opposite. They reinforced the armor of the cockpits and around the engines, and instantly success rates went up, and more young men made it home alive, and those airplanes made it home alive. And we started turning the tides of that mission and what we were doing and what we were fighting for instantly, just like that. You know? And obviously, I think we can probably already see the analogy that is at place here. We've got, you know, this group of people that have analyzed countless pieces of data, and they've taken that data and they've come up with a plan, an extremely flawed plan. And they say, wear masks. They say socially distance. They say lock down small businesses, or make it impossible, give them regulations that makes it impossible for them to actually operate. Let's divide who's essential and non-essential. Let's take away school sports and different group activities to the detriment of our youth and their mental health. Let's do this. This sounds wonderful. And if it's not working, let's just do it harder. Yeah. You know, let's put on 2 masks instead of 1. Yeah. You know what I mean? Woo! No, 6 feet isn't up to par anymore. How about we go, what is it, 3 meters now? 3 meters, right? Let's go 10 or 11 feet. That's going to make the difference, right? So this massively flawed plan, right, which everyone here can see. I'm preaching to the choir, I realize, you know. But how ridiculous is this, that they will not get off, unlike that group of men that said, you know what, this guy has a point. We got to start looking at other parts of the airplane. This is what we need to happen today. What are those other parts of the airplane? That is severe depression of all ages. That is increases of anxiety and medications and suicide rates and things that have already been mentioned here today. This is the loss of businesses, failed relationships, bankruptcy. It goes on and on and on. This is the other part of the airplane, you know. And we need to turn this over to the other side of the airplane. 2 seconds. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second there. All right. But I'm going to just continue on here, a little bit of my personal experience in this. And then we've got one more great speaker here today that I need to leave some time for. But, you know, another thing that's happening is they're taking advantage of our good nature as Canadians. We're known as some of the nicest people in the world, you know. And how do they do that? They say it's not about you. It's not about you. You don't wear your mask for you. You don't lock yourself in your home and not see your children or grandchildren for you. You know, you're doing it for others. You're protecting the vulnerable. You know, you're protecting the elderly. Come on here. And we have made it socially acceptable that if you are not on board with this plan, you will be shamed and persecuted relentlessly. And I don't speak of this because I've heard about it. I have experienced it these past 12 months, you know? And it's because from the beginning I would not go along with this plan. And there's something that you might not be able to realize about me if you don't know me from standing where you are, but I'm clinically deaf, okay? I depend on lip reading, a skill I've developed out of necessity. So, thank you. When, you know, these masks go on people's faces, my world gets taken away. I no longer belong in this world. And I think the analogy would be I've been treated, seeing this dog over here, I've been treated like a stray, unwelcome dog on this planet more often than not around here. Because I won't quite go along with it, because who's talking about this? I'm not trying to have a sob story about myself. There's hundreds of thousands of Canadians that have what's called profound hearing loss, which would mean that something like mine or worse, right? And what would you do if you knew a group of people, hundreds of thousands, were being willingly and acceptably persecuted by all these you know, regulations and mandatory things that we're doing? So I felt I have to stand up against this. And the only way I can do that is through, thank you, it's through my personal actions. That's all I can control, and I will absolutely refuse to put on a mask for anybody at any time or any place. And this stance has made it so that I've been obviously shamed either with judgmental looks or harsh words on a near daily basis. I've been refused service countless times. We don't have time for me to name them all, but everything from trying to buy a simple treat for one of my children to even being refused access to a doctor, you know? And this is going on and on and on. And we've got this socially acceptable thing where people would be like, well, good, just put the mask on and listen. And then everything is fine and dandy. But I'm telling you, it is time to get away from that. When we know this plan, is flawed, you know, and I think that's where I'm going with this today. This all knows this plan is flawed from the get-go. But what are we doing about it? We got too many good people that are on the fence that are still going along with it because it's too easy. Or, you know, it's easy. I'll just, yeah, whatever, I'll play along. Or we don't want to face a little bit of hardship or those judgmental looks that I've been dealing with. But it's our actions today in the small things that are our only hope in regaining some ground against this trend. Hoping and waiting and wishing for the government to tell you it's okay. Yeah, that's gonna work, right? What are we gonna do when they try and lock us down the third time? What are we gonna do? You know, lock us down again, right? And no opposition. Just go along with it like we are with everything else, you know? And they try and continue to bring these things on our businesses and on our personal lives and controlling who you can have in your home, and on the list goes. We know all this stuff, and it is wrong, it is evil, and it cannot go on any longer. So So I will just close up here, sorry, because I'm sure they're gonna hook me off the stage here soon. Just with saying one more thing about this persecution and such that I've kind of had to deal with, you know, and it's just, I'm all for Black Awareness Month. I'm all for Indigenous awareness, and I'm all for anti-bullying. But you tell me this, what's gonna make the biggest difference on our future generations? Wearing a pink t-shirt or example by how we treat one another?
Yes.
Right? Tell me what our action's gonna mean more, or is that pink t-shirt just gonna do it all? You know? And we are repeating history with how we are treating one another and what we are calling acceptable in this world today. And, you know, it might be a little harsh, but the people calling these hotlines, trying to report their neighbors and small businesses that are just trying to serve their customers and feed their children, the people making those phone calls are the same people that would have been phoning in their neighbors that they were housing Jews, and the same people that would have been telling the blacks to move to the back of the bus. Move over. There's a white person in town. And we think we're so advanced and we're so far removed from anything like that, and we're sitting here today repeating history. This is just the modern day version of it. So I tell you, this war will not be fought and won, this battle we're in. We don't need bullets, we don't need bombs, we definitely don't need words or rants on social media. What we need is action of each individual today. And I will no longer stand for this. I will not be ashamed. I will not back down. I will live what I believe to the fullest of my ability each and every day, and I will never quit. Try and stop me. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, big guy. Sure appreciate that. At this time, I'd like to ask Rob Anderson to come up. I think many people know Rob Anderson, but I'll give you a slight introduction. He's a partner in the law firm of WKA in Airdrie, Alberta. He was admitted to the Law Society of Alberta in 2007. He received his BA in Communications in 2003 and obtained his Juris Doctorate from the University of Alberta in 2006. Rob has been extensively involved in public service. He was the Alberta Public Accounts Committee Chair, an Alberta Treasury Board member, Assistant Solicitor General of Alberta, the Alberta Official Opposition House Leader, the Airdrie Member of Legislative Assembly of Alberta, the Airdrie Health Foundation Vice Chair, the Rocky Mountain Community Links Board Member, and a Highline Primary Care Network Board Member. He's a full-time dad, an avid hiker, and enjoys traveling the world. Highest item on his bucket list is to visit every country and try their signature dish and signature drink. His favorite quote is by Wayne Gretzky: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." I'd like to invite Rob Anderson to this.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How you doing?
Whoa, good.
Welcome to one of the last great bastions of freedom and free speech and liberty. That's rural Alberta. Welcome. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for being here today, for showing your courage against just constant barrage of attacks and shaming that goes on in our social media and in our big tech and our politicians, the mainstream media. It's unbelievable, isn't it? The pressure that's mounted against people who want to stand up for what's right, for what's good in this world. And one of those great things, of course, is fighting for liberty. And that's what you're doing here today, so thank you very much. The reason the politicians, the reason they don't like you, or they don't like these types of gatherings, is because it shows that they can't control you, because you won't be controlled. They hate that. They love to have control. They love to be able to tell people what to do and how to do it and what they can and can't say. They like that, and you won't do that. You'll have none of it. And that's why it's so important that you continue this on, so that you don't give them that control. So for those who don't know me, yes, I am Rob Anderson, the former MLA for Airdrie. I'm now a litigator, business owner, and a political commentator on my webcast, Unfiltered. Hopefully you'll You'll sign up and see it. Facebook hasn't taken me down yet. YouTube has censored me on a couple of these speeches so far, giving me a warning that they're just not going to tolerate all this anti-science from me. But really, I don't really give a flying flip what YouTube thinks of this.
Amen.
Today I want to talk to you about the hysteria, obviously, around COVID and how leftists and globalists around the world are hoping to use this so-called pandemic to fundamentally alter our way of life long term, and what we can do here in Alberta to stop this movement from succeeding. Now, I want to preface this to say that I don't believe that COVID itself, the virus itself, is made up or a hoax. I don't think most of us do. It's a very serious strain. It's a very serious virus that is more contagious and more deadly than the regular flu is. However, it is equally clear from every data point that has been gathered that COVID-19 is not even close to as serious or as deadly as is being claimed by the media or by your politicians. And you're being lied to about the seriousness of this virus, period. Then the Western world's response to the virus has caused significantly more harm and death than the virus itself. And there are so many examples of this in our province. Suicides and opioid deaths at record levels. We have a mental health epidemic in our communities, especially among our young people. And a rising generation that we have taught to fear and judge rather than to live and to love.
Yes. Yes.
That's not acceptable.
Yes.
I want to pause there because I want to talk about what's happening to our children. There are many examples of what's happening. I've talked about a couple of them, but I just was contacted by a teacher who saw one of her students take his own life recently. And talking to the parents cited the social isolation of the lockdowns, not being able to get out and see his friends, and he just lost hope, and all he had was social media, and we all know how terrible that can be. And there was an article on the CBC, yes, the CBC, if you can believe it, a couple days ago, and it said that over the last 4 months, the amount of teenagers, so those under the age of 18 who have been admitted to hospital because of suicide attempts, has quadrupled from the previous year. 4 times as many young people have tried to take their lives over these lockdowns. Now you tell me, when you hear people say that you're out here being selfish because you want to end the lockdown, you just say that what you're trying to do is stop the child abuse that is being perpetrated on our children by the government. And make sure you reach out to young people. They're confused right now. This doesn't make sense. They haven't known anything else other than this for the most part. This is completely new. They don't have that historical perspective that many of you have. So it's very important that you reach out to them, that you help them understand, that you give them perspective, that you just love them. Because they're under a lot of pressure right now. They don't quite know how to deal with it. So please reach out to those in your associations, circles, families. Don't forget them right now. They need your help and support. There are other examples of what these lockdowns have done. At a recent UN conference, the director of the World Food Program confirmed that due to the lockdowns, the number of people at risk from death due to starvation has increased from 135 million in the previous year to 270 million this year. And as a result, the world is facing its worst humanitarian disaster over these next couple of years that it's had in decades and decades. Think about that, 135 million more people than the normal are literally facing starvation due to these lockdowns and the economic devastation and the devastation on the food supply and everything else that these lockdowns have caused those, especially those who can least afford it in third world and struggling economies. It's simple, folks. When governments step in and they destroy and they damage economies and they interfere in economies in the way that they have here these past 12 months and counting, people lose their hope, they lose their businesses, they lose their means of support, and even their families. People die.
Yeah.
There are consequences. They're not saving lives.
Yeah.
They're not.
Absolutely.
And these lockdowns are killing people around the world at a rate, as you know, faster than COVID is killing people at. And of course, COVID is, of course, focusing its wrath primarily on our dear senior citizens, which is of course terrible, and we want to do everything that we can to protect the vulnerable in this crisis. But these lockdowns are killing those in the prime of their life. They're killing young people, they're killing young moms, young fathers. These are the people that the lockdowns are killing. So if you compare, if you added up the years lost to lockdowns as opposed to lost to COVID, the difference would be even more stark than it is. But the news and our politicians, well, they don't want to dwell or report on stuff like that. And the reason for that is this: they've made their choice. They've made their virtue signaling claim,
Yes.
and they have to manipulate the news in any way they can
Yes.
to look like they got it right,
Yes.
when so obviously they got it so horribly
Yes.
wrong.
Yes.
So that's what they do. They manipulate. They repeat it over and over and over again. And a lot of your friends and family and people that otherwise very intelligent people are amazingly swayed by the lies.
Yes.
Over and over and over again.
Yes.
The provincial and federal governments completely disregarded their emergency pandemic response plans that were prepared for an event just like this by actual emergency response experts. Instead, we've crowned as our leaders glorified medically trained bureaucrats and imbeciles
Yes.
with clearly no ability to perform a proper risk assessment or to understand the value of our civil liberties and freedoms. So people ask, well, Rob, what should we do about this? I get that question quite a bit. Well, the emergency plan was to, what would you have done? What could we have done differently? Well, the emergency plan was to focus our resources on protecting seniors living facilities, in senior living facilities and in hospitals. It was to have teams of care workers tested and quarantined with the seniors in those facilities for a couple of weeks at a time. So they would quarantine, make sure that they were COVID-free, go in, work for a couple of weeks, get double, triple hazard pay for doing so, come out, another team moves in, and you rotate through instead of spreading it all over the place like they did. It was a surgical approach that needed to happen here, a smart, thoughtful, surgical approach. Instead, what did government do? They took out their sledgehammer and beat the hell out of all the economy and everybody. They treated everybody as if they were a vulnerable person.
Unbelievable.
Insane.
Insane.
Absolute stupidity. I guess I would say, so the question is why? Instead of the surgical approach, you had a bunch of I would say, trust fund baby politicians like Justin Trudeau,
Yeah.
and career politicians like Jason Kenney, who have no idea what it's like to start a business. They have no idea what it's like not to have a guaranteed paycheck from Daddy's trust fund or from the government coffers, from the taxpayers. And you have these guys implementing these draconian shutdowns of entire sectors of the economy, populated primarily by those with little to no risk of a serious reaction to the virus. This was alluded to earlier, but think about this. How many people under 20 in the entire country, 35 million or whatever it is in this country, under the age of 20, how many have died from COVID?
Zero.
Zero. Not one person. So what do these idiots do?
Yeah.
They shut down all of the schools.
Yeah.
They shut down all of the children's sporting activities. Why wouldn't they let these children go to school, tell the teachers, any teacher that had a pre-existing condition or was at risk, go home, we'll take care of you, and let these children be educated and live their lives?
Yes.
Why didn't they do that?
Yes.
Pure stupidity. Alberta's own government's tracing statistics makes it abundantly clear there was almost no transmission in restaurants and gyms and salons and small businesses. So what do these guys do? They shut them down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they let the big box stores stay open.
Yeah. It's crazy.
People running around, getting, as if nothing's going on at Walmart and Target and all understand that, but you own a small business like Mr. Manti over there, they'll shut you down. Incredible. So it's a tough time, it's a scary time. Our very liberties are being trampled. Unaccountable officials whisking people away from the airport to hotel detention centers. Pastors thrown in jail for preaching to those in spiritual need, like Pastor Coates. Let's give a hand to Pastor Coates. And I have to say, he is. Where's our guy with the sign? There it is. Come on, foot. There you go. There's him. He was in Olds last time. Give him a hand. And what did we say? We said, Premier Kenny, get your butt in gear and get Pastor Coates out of jail last time. That's what we said, right? Well, guess what? Pastor Coates is out of jail. Now they got to drop the charges, right? Drop those charges. So we have these situations, and we have a so-called conservative premier in Alberta telling us how many people we can and can't have in our own homes. Can you imagine that?
No.
Quite a conservative premier. Quite a liberty-loving premier we have. Millions died for the right to assemble freely, and now we have the government telling us who we can and can't have in our homes, with our families. That has got to stop. Just love Premier Kenny on the tube telling us about how this isn't really a lockdown. This isn't really a lockdown. You can still go out for food and all that. Premier, you can't even have mom and dad over for supper. Give your head a shake. That's a lockdown. He needs to do a lot of things, frankly. We need to never forget this moment. We need to never forget what your leaders were willing to do when the going got tough. At worst, they used it for political advantage. At best, as was the case in this province, they folded like a cheap tent after hearing the tantrums of those on the left who would be paid, frankly, to stay at home the whole time while their neighbors lost their livelihoods, and in some cases, their lives. But is there something more going on here? Is there another agenda? Now, of course, governments do it, these lockdowns, they say, to keep us all safe from virus. Depending on the politician, this is either a statement stemming from ignorance and fear, or in the case of others, it is a flat-out lie in furtherance of their agenda. And it is one such agenda I wish to touch on today, as well as what we need to do about it. You've probably heard of the Great Reset? Yeah. The Great Reset is one of Justin Trudeau's projects. He's advocating, this crowd doesn't like Justin Trudeau. Well, I thought, no man, that's a surprise. You've probably heard Justin Trudeau advocating for this thing on multiple occasions. So what is this Great Reset? Well, for that we need to go to the UN's World Economic Forum. And this is the forum that globalist world political, economic leaders like Justin Trudeau intend to coordinate with others how to tackle primarily climate change and their little leftist social justice issues and so forth. It's like a socialist boot camp for billionaires, politicians, and trust fund babies, kind of. Their website explains, they don't hide anything, by the way. Their website's very clear what they're looking for. What they're looking for in this is they want to transition the world from a shareholder ownership of companies to stakeholder ownership of companies, meaning you won't really own for-profit companies anymore. Businesses will be told by government what they can and cannot sell. Just like we see a lot today during this COVID pandemic, if you'll notice, so-called pandemic. Some businesses will be illegal or taxed and regulated for the purpose of being phased out of existence entirely, and that includes specifically the abolition of all fossil fuels. Businesses and individuals will also be told by the government what their CO2 footprint can and can't look like. For agriculture, specifically for ranchers and farmers, they'll be told what they can and can't produce, or they will be taxed in a manner that will make them obey or go bankrupt regardless. The Great Reset also calls for a massive, unprecedented redistribution of wealth. And I'm not just talking about higher taxes for the wealthy. I'm talking about world equalization payments. much like Alberta sent tens of billions to Quebec and the Maritimes to support their poorly run social programs and economies, countries and businesses with more wealth will be compelled to share that wealth with poorer countries in profitable and corrupt industries. And further, the UN and other globalist organizations will be given the power over the world's economies and governance. Effectively, you will no longer really vote for a local representative in a government body that has a real, meaningful power over the most important aspects of your lives: communications, media, economic policy, trade policy, health and education. All of it will be primarily governed largely by centralized, primarily unelected bureaucrats and large tech companies. The United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, and the World Economic Forum will essentially be setting the laws for the world to follow. This is not a conspiracy, it's happening. There are dozens of examples of it happening right in front of our eyes. It's the plan of the leftist globalists. They're not hiding it at all. The Great Reset is designed to usher in an era of global quasi-democratic socialism for the purpose, they will tell you, of saving the world from the climate crisis and the evil imbalances and injustices of capitalism. Evil capitalism. It's done nothing for the world, has it? I'm being facetious. You couldn't tell. And Justin Trudeau is a key member of this movement. He is one of its most public champions and advocates. Let's be perfectly clear here. The stated objective of Justin Trudeau's Liberals, from his own mouth during the last campaign, is to accelerate the phase-out of the West's energy industry. And Jason Kenney, though he says, in fairness, that he will not support the Great Reset, he has done absolutely nothing to stop its agenda from entering within our borders. So everyone listening to this whose family or business relies wholly or partially on a healthy energy industry, does anybody have a job here in the energy industry? Put your hands up. Anybody have a job that relies on a healthy energy industry? Yeah, just a few of you. So if you have that, how about ranching, agriculture? Yeah? I love that cowbell. Gotta have more of that. If you have your job, or if your job is related or needs these agriculture and energy industry to be healthy here in Alberta, your family and your businesses are in the crosshairs of Canada's current federal government, and the current provincial government, under its current leadership, is doing nothing to stop it. People can stick their heads in the sand on this, and they often do. But if they do, they will wake up one day to find out the liberties and freedoms that we had all once cherished and enjoyed are gone, as well as our savings, our wealth, our businesses, our way of life, and a whole lot more. So what do we do about it here in Western Canada? How, in Alberta in particular, how do we fight against a movement so vast and so coordinated and powerful? It seems like a bit of an uphill climb, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. We've never been afraid of a little uphill battle, have we, here in Alberta? No. First off, do not be silent any longer.
Yeah.
Don't be silent. Don't be shouted down by the left-wing media, because they'll do it,
Yeah.
guaranteed. Doesn't matter what the facts are.
Yeah.
They will make you out to be demons and everything else under the sun. Don't be shouted down by billionaire-backed organizations or big tech, Facebook, YouTube, any of these, Twitter. Good grief, Twitter. And don't be cowed by our left-wing or our weak-kneed politicians in this province or in this country. You must speak up to your elected officials. There are good ones out there. So you got to find them, and you got to speak to them and keep them strong and on the path. You must speak to your family and friends, of course. Get groups of like-minded individuals together and join, this is key, join your local, federal, and provincial constituency associations for your MLA and your MP. Make sure that your mayors, your MLAs, your MPs are not part of this movement, and if they are, you find a way to vote them out immediately. And not just at the election level. The nomination level is actually in places like rural Alberta is more important than the general election. This determines who's going to be the representative of the party that's likely going to win, which is going to be the Conservative Party. Although provincially that might change, but that's important. Get involved on your boards. Get involved in those local nominations. Run for office if need be, especially in upcoming municipal elections. Demand your leaders push back and fight this Great Reset movement at every turn. And what specifically should we be fighting for as an example? Well, for one, we need to push for the decentralization of government power back to the local level, wherever possible. Bring decision-making back to our local communities and our province where it is far more accountable. Okay? For example, you may have heard that our federal Canadian government wields far too much power and control over the provinces, especially Alberta. Ottawa has been using this control to rob us of our resources and our wealth for years in order to buy votes in other provinces using socialist policies like equalization, carbon taxes, the NEP, and the list goes on and on. Now, under the Great Reset, and as Mr. Trudeau stated during the election, Ottawa's goal is to now phase out the West's oil and gas industry entirely. The only effective way to fight this economic tyranny, economic terrorism, because that's what it is, the only way to fight this is to take back the power to make decisions here that will benefit the women, the men, and the children of our great province. We do this by replacing the RCMP with a provincial police force accountable to us. We do it by collecting all taxes, federal and provincial, and remitting to the federal government only what is theirs after first taking back what they took from us in equalization. We do it by opting out of all federal control programs seeking to govern our pension plan, our natural resources, our health care, our education. Get Ottawa out of our lives. We use every single tool at our disposal to force Ottawa to give back power to the people of Alberta. And this may mean some pretty tense times. It may mean some strategic civil disobedience where appropriate. But we have to do this. Because if we don't, my friends, Ottawa is going to bleed this province dry. It will destroy our economy and our freedoms, and we will be under the control of a primarily unelected leftist set of globalists, dead set on imposing their agenda on our backs, their Great Reset agenda, without a second thought of how that agenda will destroy the lives of the communities and people that we love, and we cannot let that happen.
No.
Yeah, we can't let that happen. So think for a moment about what is happening all around the world with the so-called COVID pandemic. In the name of this crisis, governments have shut down entire industries, destroyed countless businesses, confined families to their homes, segregated seniors against their will, denied medical treatment and procedures that weren't COVID-related to the sick and those who need it, forced us to wear non-medical face coverings for over a year. All of these things were unimaginable in 2019. Honestly, I knew that the leftists were bold, but could any of you possibly think of this in 2019? It's incredible how it's happened. They're not unimaginable anymore. And so many have gone along with this being told it was their civil duty to do so, their patriotic duty to do so. Well, it's our patriotic duty to demand that it stops now. And I'd like you to ask yourself, when this COVID crisis is over and the globalists go back to the climate crisis, do you really think leftists like Justin Trudeau won't learn and apply what has happened here to their so-called climate crisis? Frankly, it's not only possible, it's entirely likely that these politicians and globalist billionaires and big tech will try and use many of the tactics deployed to address the COVID crisis to now fight their even more deadly so-called climate crisis. After all, COVID just kills people. CO2, well, as far as they're concerned, that could destroy the entire world. If a few million have to lose their livelihoods and a few billion their right to free speech in order to save the world, well, that's a small price to pay for them. Think about that.
Yeah.
We cannot let that happen. We need to be aware and we need to be strong.
Yeah.
We need to speak up, we need to be involved, be unapologetic in doing so. Be smart about it. Don't be lunatics, as I'm sometimes called. Be smart about it, but do so peacefully without resorting to the divisive language of the left. Do not be silenced by the Trudeaus, the Kennys, the Facebooks, the Twitters of this world. We are Albertans. We are one of the last strongholds of liberty, and we need to keep it that way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Wave that flag. I was saying we need a few more Alberta flags up on this stage next time, I think, eh?
Yeah.
Do not be silenced anymore. We can do it, we must. It's our duty to come together and keep this beautiful land, this gorgeous land of ours, strong and free for our families, our children, and for their children.
Yes.
And I know we can if we will stand together and be courageous. And that's why I thank you for being here and being courageous today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. That was wonderful. I want to thank all the speakers here, Del and Matt and Rob. I want to thank everyone here that came. This is a great site, and we need more of these, and we need all of you to be involved. Get involved with your children and the rest of your family. Get the message out. There's lots that we can do. Write letters, make phone calls. Do your civic duty, which is to fight the lockdowns. So thank you for coming, and I want to say everyone have a wonderful day. This is World Freedom Day, so we are partaking in World Freedom Day. I'd also like to say there's information. I just want to reiterate that there's information and posters and stuff over at the table. Please help yourself with those things. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Sunday.